Good morning, guys. Today we are going to be talking about the properties of life. So we know that biology is the study of life. And so what we're looking at today is how do we know if something's alive? If you may feel that you innately know, you just automatically know if something is alive or not alive, but some things are a little bit more difficult to distinguish. And so in order to answer the tough questions of whether or not something is alive, we have, as biologists, kind of come up with a series of qualities that all life shares in common. In your book, these properties, there are 8 of them that they say that life shares in common. Different books will sometimes give you different lists. You could have 5, you can have 8, you can have 10. Sometimes they clump some of them together, they'll link them together. Other times they spread them out a little bit more. So it's not so much that you're thinking about what's the list or how can I, memorize the list. It's more about what properties do living things share? And I want you to be thinking about how all living things are able to share these particular properties. So we're going to start by looking at our first property, made up of cells. So all living things are made up of cells. One cell or many cells. In order to show structure, all things need to have a cell. So a cell has a membrane around the outside. It keeps things that are in, and things that are out. It's pretty important to think that if you want to name something as being alive, if you want to name it as being real, there needs to be a boundary between what's in that organism and what is not. So a lot of times, different organisms will arrange their cells. Organism breaks down into organ systems. Can you think of an organ system? Something like digestion, nervous system, respiratory system, integumentary, that's your skin, excretory, like your bladder, muscular, your skeletal system. All of these are systems. Within the system, there are different organs, and those organs are made of tissues. So if you were to take, for example, the digestive system, you would take an organ like the stomach, and in the stomach, there are various layers of muscle tissue, but also of epithelial tissue, which can secrete different things like hydrochloric acid or different enzymes to break down food in your stomach. And so all of those are different tissues kind of layered together. And each of those tissues is made up of different cells. Even blood is a tissue. And so this picture here is a good example of how blood is a tissue. You can see the different cells that are working together. So we're going to write up here, made of cells. So that's our first, okay? They're made of cells, and remember, this separates what's in from out, okay? What keeps the organism, what's inside the organism from what's not a part of the organism. Okay, our second consideration is reproduction. So all living things need to be able to make more living things in order to be able to keep their species alive. So the second thing is reproduction. Reproduction can be considered sexual reproduction. So in sexual reproduction, you have 2 organisms. They recombine their DNA. They make an egg and a sperm if they're animals, or maybe they make a pollen grain and an egg, which is still a sperm. If they're flowers, fungi do a form of sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is like a Xerox machine. So in asexual reproduction, a single cell makes another single cell, something like a bacteria or a virus, which we'll talk about later, whether or not viruses are technically alive, but they're going to be able to reproduce. The idea is that the survival of the species is dependent on more of the species being born. You can't just have a single individual. You need to be making generations after that. So reproduction is not a requirement to be alive, but it is a requirement for a species to stay alive. Okay, so reproduction, we'll say, is passing along or more, because we need to keep making more and more and more individuals. Okay, so our next one is that all life is based on the universal genetic code. So that's DNA. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is a structure. It's this very beautiful, you can see a picture of it down here, this very beautiful structure that is repeating bases of adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine, and they pair up. So adenine pairs with thymine, and guanine and cytosine form a pattern, and they repeat. And these pairings that they make allows them to pass their genes on to their offspring. And so what's really crazy to think about, but very true, is that you, being you, all of your features are encoded in this just repetition of A's and T's and G's and C's. And that's it. It's just this repeating code. And that repeating code gets expressed into all of these proteins. And those proteins become who you are. And all of it is based on this genetic code. What's really crazy to think is how similar we are in common with other animals. I mean, even plants. Our commonality of our genetic code is so significant that we can say that all life is based on this genetic code. So we're going to say based on a genetic code, okay? And the really important thing about the genetic code is that it can store our genetic information. And it does that when it stores our genetic information. That genetic information is getting passed through reproduction, okay? It gets passed through reproduction. So the next thing that all living organisms can do is grow and develop. All things have a life cycle. You have a life cycle. Humans have a life cycle. We know, we can tell baby to infant to toddler, if you're being very specific, to child, and then a child becomes an adolescent becomes an adult. And so we move through this growth and development. We expect babies to be smaller than grown-ups, right? Growth and development. And so all living things have this cycle. Maybe one of the more interesting ones is that of a butterfly that starts as an egg and then forms a caterpillar, and then the caterpillar builds a chrysalis, and then the chrysalis hatches and becomes a butterfly. If you've ever read The Very Hungry Caterpillar, you'll know that life cycle. Plants have a life cycle as well. Mature plants form these pollen grains, and the pollen grains travel through the air and they meet up with another flower. The pollen grain grows a tube down into the ovule and then sends sperm down to fertilize the flower. And then that flower becomes, or that fertilized egg becomes a seed, and the seed gets planted, and then the whole plant has to regrow. That is also a life cycle. That's their process of growth and development throughout their life. So all organisms have a system of growth and development as they go from being born, conceived, all the way through until their adult maturity. We see this cycle of growth. And so if something is going to be alive, we know that it's going to grow and develop throughout its life cycle. Okay, we're halfway done. So the next one that we're going to talk about is that in order to be alive, something needs to respond to its environment. So we're going to call this a stimulus. Okay, so we're going to call this respond. So they're going to respond to their environment. And so what I put up here is stimuli leads to response. Okay, so this stimulus could be something is thrown at your face and you try to catch it, or you duck. This could be you feel hungry, so you go get food. It can be an internal stimulus, okay, like you're hungry, so you go get food, or it can be an external stimulus. You're walking in the street and the car is coming, so you move out of the way. That's an external stimulus. Either way, animals, in order to be alive, in order to continue living, are going to need to respond to their environment. So they need to be able to sense it and then respond to it. And that requires a lot of different things. You might be wondering, like, well, but how does a plant respond to its environment? Well, a plant grows towards the light, right? And if you've ever seen a sunflower during the day, it actually turns its head of the flower in order to face the sun as the sun moves through the sky. You have funguses that grow in different locations based on nutrients. So they can sense where the nutrients are and they can grow into those locations. That is also a sense and respond. So it doesn't need to be like a motor response, like moving out of the way, like you moving out of the way of the car, but it can be instead like a growth response. Where are you going to grow to? In which area are you going to grow? Even earliest protista that were on the earth show that they move towards the light and or away from the light, depending on what nutrients they're looking for. And so they're able to sense and respond to light. So life needs to be able to sense and respond. Okay, so our sixth characteristic of life, a property of life, is evolution. And evolution is change over time. Changing with time. And we don't mean a little bit of time, we mean a lot of time. 40, 50, 60 generations, okay? You, as a person, can probably think back a few generations of humans, right? Maybe you have nieces and nephews, so that's your next generation, right? That's the future, okay? Your brother and sister's children. And then, of course, you know your generation, your siblings, and you know your parents' generation, and your grandparents' generation, and maybe even your great-grandparents. So you've got nieces, you, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. 5. You know 5 generations of humans. We're talking about 50, 60, 70, hundreds of generations ago, okay? We're looking at this process of evolution. Change over a long, long, long time. And really what's happening in terms of evolution is that adult parents have more offspring than can survive. This is less true of humans and it's less true now, but what it means is that we have more offspring than can survive. It's easier to think about this in terms of a spider or in terms of a plant, right? You know, spiders make those big sacks of eggs, and what's going to happen is when those eggs hatch, there's all of these different spiders coming out. If you've ever seen or read Charlotte's Web, you know what I'm talking about. All of these spiders are leaving, and not all of them are going to survive. And so the ones that do survive were probably more suited to the environment. Those ones then survive and they reproduce into the next generation. And so whatever genes, whatever this one, genetic code, they had gets passed along more regularly into the next generation. Gradually, this accumulation of beneficial traits is what we call evolution. And we can see it really well enhanced here with this owl hiding in the tree. Now, it's not like one day the owl just became well camouflaged to hiding in the tree. But instead, an accumulation of genes has allowed the owl to look so well suited to its environment. You can imagine then that this particular owl is significantly better at hunting and not being hunted than, let's say, a brown owl, just a plain brown owl in the exact same position. That's the concept of evolution. It sometimes gets a strange kind of name to it, or a strange bunch of things attributed to it. That's not really what we're about. We're about really staying in the science of what evolution is, okay? Adaptive change over time. Easy, right? So the evolution over time. And is it a little time or a long time? It's a long time, okay? Adaptive change over a long time. All right. Okay, so the next thing that we need to talk about is maintaining internal balance. Internal balance. This kind of goes back to this idea that everything is made of cells, okay? That we're all made of cells and that we keep our insides in and our outsides out, okay? We want to keep that inside a really cozy, nice environment with all of the proper things, with the right salt balance, with the right temperature, with the right amount of water. Homeostasis is going to regulate all of those things. So homeostasis is this idea that when the external environment fluctuates, our internal environment compensates, okay? So this is how we compensate or maintain a constant inside while the outside can be going crazy, okay? So if you're in a very hot temperature outside, you go outside, it's 110, your body has to maintain a 98.6 degree temperature on the inside. You can't turn to be 110. You would cook. Your organs would not survive. Same thing if you go out and it's 30 degrees outside. Your body needs to maintain a 98.6 degree temperature. And so it's going to have to do extra work to keep you warm. So if you go out in the cold and you're outside for a while, what starts to happen? You need to get warm and you start to shiver, right? When you shiver, you're getting these micro movements in your muscles, and those movements serve to heat up your body. If you go out on a hot day and it's too hot outside, then your body's going to start sweating and you're going to start creating all of this sweat, and that sweat is going to cool your body back off. So maintaining internal balance, we call that homeostasis. Homeo means the same, and stasis means status, like a status report. So we want to keep the same status, homeostasis, inside of our bodies. If you can't maintain your internal temperature, if you can't maintain your internal conditions, obviously the environment is going to cause you to die. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to talk about is that all living things need energy. They need material and energy. Organisms need to keep their energy in order to keep up with all of this stuff. Everything else on this list, maintaining balance for homeostasis, evolving, maybe not, responding to the environment, growing and developing, reproducing, making cells, expressing our genetic code, all of those things require energy, a constant input of energy. Our brains require so much energy in order to just be thinking right now. You may not think of yourself as expending a whole bunch of energy, but I bet when you're done with today and you've learned everything you need to learn, you're going to feel tired. That's because your brain is burning through energy as you learn. Your brain requires so much energy. Everything we do requires energy. In order to get that energy, of course, we eat. But the coffee that I have or the egg that I eat, that's not really energy. I have to turn it into energy, and that process requires metabolism. So this is where biology runs straight into chemistry. And when we eat food, that food needs to be changed chemically into a usable form of energy. And so this process is a requirement for all life. In order to be alive, you need to be able to change what materials are available to you into usable energy. Okay, so we're going to do metabolism here as our kind of explanation for needing materials to make energy and needing materials and energy. We need to turn what we have into what we need, okay? And so that we get enough energy to survive. So here is our list. Properties of life. All life is made of cells. It can reproduce. It's based on the genetic code. All life can grow and develop, respond to stimuli, respond to the environment, stimuli in the environment, evolve, maintain internal balance, and all life needs materials and energy in order to do all of these things. Okay, so I want you to think of some things that are alive and some properties of life, and then you're going to go and take the quiz on which things are alive and why.